The great council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Kethva finished reading the report. Her 6 arms trembled slightly as she set down the datapad. Around the massive circular table, representatives from 43 different species stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. "Read it again," demanded Councillor Zeftar, his reptilian features twisted into a scowl. "This cannot be correct." Kethva's voice shook as she repeated the words that would change everything. "All human settlements, stations, and ships have vanished from known space. 247 worlds, 1,847 space stations, countless vessels, gone without any warning or explanation." The chamber erupted in chaos. Some council members stood and shouted across the table. Others activated their translation devices, speaking rapidly in their native languages. A few simply sat in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process the impossible. High Councillor Vorthon, eldest member of the council, raised his massive hand for silence. His ancient voice carried the weight of centuries as he spoke. "How is this possible? An entire species does not simply disappear overnight. The timeline shows it happened over 72 hours, Kethva explained, pulling up holographic displays above the table, starting from the outer rim colonies and moving inward. No distress signals were sent. No emergency beacons activated. They just left. Councillor Mexhari, representing the trade guilds, leaned forward with obvious annoyance. "This is clearly some kind of human trick. They probably want better trade agreements or reduced tribute payments. Humans always were too emotional and unpredictable." Several other council members nodded in agreement. Humans had always been different from the other species in the galaxy. While most civilized races focused on art, philosophy, and politics, humans seemed obsessed with work. They took the dangerous jobs nobody else wanted. They volunteered for missions that other species considered suicide. "Perhaps we should consider what drove them to this action," suggested Councillor Yithan, her crystalline form flickering with uncertain colors. "Has anyone reviewed our recent policies regarding human territories?" Councillor Drexnell, military advisor to the council, snorted with derision. Humans were given exactly what they deserved. They provided useful services and we allowed them to exist in our galaxy. What more could they want? They wanted council representation, Ethan replied quietly. They requested voting rights on matters affecting their colonies. The request was denied last year. Of course it was denied, Mexhari said, his voice rising. Humans are a working species. They mine dangerous asteroids, fight in hazardous wars, and clean up toxic spills. They are not equipped for the complex decisions of galactic governance. High Councillor Vorthon studied the holographic displays showing empty space where human worlds once thrived. Regardless of our past decisions, we now face a practical problem. Who will maintain the mining operations in the deadly nebula? Who will patrol the pirate routes near the galactic rim? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For 300 years, humans had performed the galaxy's most dangerous jobs. They worked in environments that would kill most other species within minutes. They fought wars that other civilizations were too refined to engage in directly. They cleaned up disasters that everyone else considered too risky to approach. We will adapt, declared Councillor Zeftar. Other species can learn to do these tasks. Humans were not irreplaceable. Kethva looked at her datapad again, her expression growing more troubled. There is something else. Our deep space sensors detected massive energy signatures just before the disappearances. The readings suggest advanced propulsion technology far beyond anything in our databases. Impossible, scoffed Drexnall. Human technology is primitive compared to ours. They use brute force approaches while we rely on elegant solutions. They could not have developed anything we do not already possess. Yet they are gone, Yithan observed. And we detected no conventional hyperspace jumps. No standard warp signatures. Whatever they used to leave, it was not technology we recognize. High Councillor Vorthon called for order as the discussion grew heated. We will establish investigation committees to determine what happened. Meanwhile, we must address the immediate concerns. Mining Guild, prepare alternative plans for resource extraction. Military Command, reassign patrol duties to available fleets. Mexhari stood and activated his personal display. I have already run preliminary calculations. Replacing human mining operations will require a 30% increase in automated systems and a 60% increase in hazard pay for other species. The cost will be substantial. And the military situation is worse, Drexnell admitted reluctantly. Humans comprised 40% of our rapid response forces and 70% of our special operations teams. They handled missions that other species refused to accept. Counselor Quintar, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why they refused to give any warning. In 3 centuries of cooperation, humans never acted without explanation. They were always direct in their communications, sometimes brutally honest. They were insubordinate, Mexhari replied, always questioning orders, always suggesting improvements to our systems. They showed insufficient respect for established authority. They got results, Quintar countered. Human-led operations had the highest success rates in the galaxy. Their casualty rates were terrible, but they completed missions that others declared impossible. Ethan's crystalline form shifted to darker colors. I reviewed the records from last month's session. The vote to classify humans as a permanent labor class passed by a wide margin. Perhaps they learned about our decision. The chamber fell silent again. The vote had been conducted in closed session with tight security protocols. Only council members and their most trusted advisors had access to the proceedings. Even if they knew, Vorthon said slowly, where could an entire species go? Space is vast, but our sensor networks cover every habitable system within 1,000 light-years. Kethva manipulated the holographic display, showing the galaxy's spiral arms. Long-range sensors detected energy trails leading toward the galactic edge. But the signatures fade after about 500 light-years. Whatever propulsion system they used, it operates on principles we do not understand. We will find them, Drexnell declared, and when we do, there will be consequences for this abandonment of duty. Humans had obligations to fulfill, contracts to honor. What contracts? Asked Quintar. Humans were never given formal citizenship status. They had no legal protections, no guaranteed rights. They worked for us because we allowed them to exist in our territory. High Counselor Vorthon raised his hand again. These philosophical discussions can wait. Our immediate priority is maintaining galactic stability. Mining operations must continue. Trade routes must remain secure. Research projects cannot be abandoned. As the council members filed out of the chamber, many were already making plans to replace human contributions to galactic society. They spoke of increased automation, higher wages for dangerous work, and new recruitment programs for other species. None of them noticed the empty observation deck that had once housed human diplomatic staff. None of them wondered why the humans had built that viewing area in the first place, or why they had always maintained representatives at council sessions even though they had no voting rights. The humans had been watching and listening for 300 years. They had learned from every debate, every decision, every moment of casual dismissal, and when the final vote was cast to make their subjugation permanent, they had quietly made their own decision. By the time the council realized something was wrong, humanity was already beyond the reach of galactic civilization, carrying with them secrets and capabilities that no one had bothered to notice or appreciate. The galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant to lose something irreplaceable. 3 months had passed since humanity's disappearance, and the first cracks in galactic society were becoming impossible to ignore. Counselor Vexitari sat in her private office, surrounded by reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. The Altarian had been appointed to lead the investigation into human affairs, a task that seemed simple when it began but grew more complex with each passing day. The mining crisis hit first and hardest. The deadly nebula, rich in rare metals essential for starship construction, had been completely abandoned. 3 attempts to send non-human crews into the radioactive cloud had ended in disaster. The nebula's shifting energy storms and toxic gases created conditions that would kill most species within hours, even with the best protective equipment. Humans worked there for 50 years without a single fatality, muttered Chief Engineer Zaktos as he reviewed the latest casualty reports. How did they survive what kills everyone else? The answer came from archived medical records that Vextari had been studying. Humans possessed an unusual ability to adapt to hostile environments. Their bodies could develop resistance to radiation levels that would sterilize other species. They seemed almost designed for survival in conditions that others found impossible. Trade routes throughout the galaxy were collapsing at an alarming rate. The Crimson Passage, a vital shipping lane through pirate-controlled space, had become completely impassable. Without human security forces, merchant vessels were being attacked and captured with impunity. Insurance rates have increased by 400%, reported Trade Minister Lex Von during the Emergency Council session. Most shipping companies are refusing to operate in previously secure regions. High Counselor Vorthon looked older than his 800 years. What about our military forces? Can they not provide adequate protection? General Drexnell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our regular forces are trained for conventional warfare between civilized species. Humans specialized in irregular combat situations. They understood pirates, mercenaries, and other criminal elements in ways that we do not. The admission hung heavy in the chamber. For centuries, the Council had viewed human military tactics as crude and overly aggressive. Now they were learning that those same tactics had been the foundation of galactic security. Vextari had spent weeks reviewing human military records, and what she found troubled her deeply. Humans didn't just fight differently from other species, they fought for different reasons. While most galactic military forces focused on protecting their own territories and interests, human units consistently risked themselves for any species under threat. The Battle of Kepler Station illustrated this perfectly. When the Ravager fleet attacked the research facility, human forces had arrived first and held the line until backup could arrive. They suffered 60% casualties protecting a station that held no strategic value for humanity. The researchers they saved were from 12 different species, none of them human. They called it their duty, Vextari whispered, reading the after-action report. Not their orders, their duty. Exploration into unknown regions had ground to a complete halt. The Deep Space Survey Corps, humanity's most dangerous assignment, had been responsible for 90% of new world discoveries in the past century. They ventured into star systems that other species deemed too risky, mapped dangerous phenomena that could destroy unprepared ships, and made first contact with potentially hostile alien life. Dr. Yithin had been working with human survey teams for 20 years before their disappearance. She stood before the Science Council, her crystalline form dim with grief and confusion. They volunteered for missions that had less than 50% survival rates, she explained. Not because they were reckless, but because they believed the knowledge gained would benefit everyone. I lost 17 human colleagues over the years, and each time more humans volunteered to take their places. The economic impact was staggering. Entire industries built on human labor were shutting down. Toxic waste cleanup operations ceased when no other species could survive the contaminated environments. Deep space construction projects were abandoned because only humans were willing to work in the vacuum of space for extended periods. Most shocking of all was the discovery of humanity's role in medical research. Hidden in classified files, Vextari found records of human volunteers for experimental treatments and dangerous medical procedures. They had served as test subjects for vaccines, radiation treatments, and surgical techniques that saved millions of lives across the galaxy. They never asked for recognition, Dr. Mexhari admitted when confronted with the evidence. They said helping others was reward enough. I thought they were just simple-minded. Vextari's investigation revealed a pattern that made her stomach twist with shame. In every dangerous situation, in every crisis that threatened galactic civilization, humans had been the first to volunteer and the last to retreat. They had built their society around concepts that other species barely understood: sacrifice, duty, and honor. The Council's archives held 3 centuries of human contributions that had been systematically overlooked or dismissed. Humans had developed most of the safety protocols used in hazardous environments. They had created disaster response procedures that saved countless lives. They had established peaceful relations with dozens of previously hostile species through patient diplomacy and personal sacrifice. Look at this, Vextari said to her research team, displaying a holographic timeline. Every major advancement in galactic safety and security has human fingerprints on it, and we classified them as laborers. The first refugee crisis began in the 4th month. The Zephyrian Empire, emboldened by the absence of human rapid response forces, launched attacks on 3 independent colonies. In the past, human peacekeeping units would have arrived within days to establish order and negotiate ceasefires. Now, with human forces gone, the attacks continued for weeks. Entire planetary populations fled their homes, creating a humanitarian disaster that the remaining galactic forces were completely unprepared to handle. Humans had protocols for everything, reported Emergency Coordinator Quintar. Refugee camps, medical aid, food distribution, temporary shelter. They had systems in place that we never bothered to learn because we assumed they would always be there to handle it. The council chambers, once filled with confident debate and political maneuvering, now echoed with desperate discussions of basic survival. Species that had spent centuries focused on philosophy and art were suddenly faced with the brutal realities that humans had been handling all along. "We need to find them," High Counselor Vorthan declared. "The galaxy cannot function without their contributions." "What if they refuse to return?" asked Yithan. "What if they have found something better than what we offered them?" The question silenced the chamber. For the first time, council members were forced to consider what humanity's perspective might have been. What would it feel like to be valued only for dangerous work, while being denied basic representation? What would it feel like to sacrifice everything for others who viewed you as expendable? Vextari looked at the growing stack of reports on her desk. Military failures, economic collapse, humanitarian disasters, all consequences of losing the species they had taken for granted. They were holding us together, she realized aloud. All this time they were the foundation that everything else was built on, and we never even noticed. Outside her office window, she could see one of the human monuments they had built throughout galactic space. The inscription read, "In service to all species, for the betterment of all civilization." For 300 years, humans had lived up to those words while the rest of the galaxy had forgotten what they meant. 6 months after humanity vanished, the galaxy was dying. Not all at once, but slowly, like a massive ship taking on water through 1,000 small holes. Each day brought new disasters, new crises that exposed how dependent galactic civilization had become on the species they had dismissed as mere laborers. Counselor Vextari stood before the emergency assembly, her report thick with catastrophic updates. The Great Council chamber, once filled with representatives from 43 species, now held barely half that number. Many civilizations had withdrawn from galactic affairs entirely, choosing isolation over the chaos that had consumed previously stable regions. "The Andromedan Trade Compact has officially dissolved," she announced to the diminished gathering. "Without secure shipping lanes, member worlds can no longer maintain economic ties. 7 species have declared bankruptcy. 12 others have imposed complete trade embargoes." High Counselor Vorthan, who seemed to age years with each passing week, struggled to maintain order. "What about the emergency shipping protocols? The military escort programs?" General Drexnell's response carried the weight of defeat. "Our conventional forces cannot adapt to asymmetric threats. Pirates and raiders use tactics that humans developed to fight them. Without human advisors, we are trying to fight shadows with torches." The criminal underworld had exploded across the galaxy once they realized that human law enforcement was gone. Organizations that had been contained for centuries now operated openly, knowing that no rapid response teams would come to stop them. Slave trading, which humans had nearly eliminated, was returning to levels not seen in 1,000 years. Dr. Yithan materialized in the chamber, her crystalline form flickering with urgent colors. She had traveled from the far rim to deliver news that would shake the council to its core. "Kepler 442b is lost," she said without preamble. "The plague we detected 3 weeks ago has consumed the entire planet." The silence that followed was deafening. Kepler 442b had been home to over 2 billion beings from 15 different species. It was a center of learning and culture, known throughout the galaxy for its universities and research centers. "How is that possible?" demanded Medical Coordinator Luxvin. "We deployed every available medical team. We implemented all standard containment protocols. The plague is unlike anything in our databases," Yithan explained, her light dimming with exhaustion. "It appears to be artificially created, designed to target multiple species simultaneously. Traditional treatments are useless. The infection rate is 97% and the mortality rate is absolute." Vextari felt ice form in her stomach. "What about the human medical protocols? They dealt with biological weapons before." "That's why I came in person," Yithan replied. "I spent the last week in the abandoned human medical facilities on Kepler 442b. Their laboratories contain research on pathogens that we never knew existed. They had treatments, vaccines, and countermeasures for thousands of biological threats." She activated a holographic display showing human medical records. They were prepared for this exact type of engineered plague. They had antidotes ready for deployment within hours of outbreak detection. Their rapid response medical teams could have contained this infection before it left the first city. The implications crashed over the council like a tidal wave. Humans hadn't just been willing to work in dangerous medical situations. They had been actively preparing for threats that other species had never even imagined. "How many more plagues are out there?" whispered Counselor Quintar. "How many other weapons did humans know about that we ignored?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep space monitoring stations had detected 17 different biological weapons deployed across the galaxy in the past month. Each one targeted specific species or regions that had previously been protected by human medical teams. Someone has been waiting for this moment, Vextari realized. They knew that without humans we would be helpless against engineered diseases. The Galactic University system was collapsing under its own weight. 40% of their research had been conducted by human scientists, willing to take risks that others considered suicidal. Without them, breakthrough research into dangerous phenomena had ground to a halt. Professor Mektar had spent his career studying neutron stars alongside human colleagues. He stood before the Science Council, his forearms trembling with frustration. "They didn't just collect data," he explained. "They physically went places that would kill anyone else. They descended into gas giant atmospheres, survived in the hearts of cosmic storms, walked on the surfaces of worlds that should have been uninhabitable. The discoveries humans had made were now being lost as other species proved incapable of replicating their methods. Technologies that had seemed primitive were revealed to be elegantly simple solutions to problems that others had overcomplicated. They understood that knowledge requires sacrifice." Professor Mektar continued. "They were willing to die for discoveries that would benefit species they had never even met. The refugee crisis had exploded beyond all control. 37 worlds had been abandoned as their populations fled from various threats. Emergency shelters designed by humans were failing because no one else understood how to maintain them. Supply lines that humans had established were breaking down without their constant attention. Humanitarian coordinator Nexala stood before a map showing the galaxy's refugee movements. Red indicators marked abandoned worlds while yellow showed regions under threat. The amount of green space indicating stable and safe areas had shrunk to less than 30% of previously habitable space. Humans built systems assuming they would always be there to operate them, she explained. They created networks of support that required constant maintenance and adjustment. Without their oversight, everything is falling apart. The most devastating discovery came from Vextari's investigation into human decision-making processes. She had found records of council sessions from the week before humanity's departure. The final vote that had sealed their fate was even worse than she had imagined. The motion wasn't just to classify humans as a permanent labor class, she reported to the Emergency Council. The full text designated them as expendable biological resources with limited cognitive capacity. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Several council members looked physically ill as they realized what they had voted for. The vote passed 31-12, Vextari continued, with 12 abstentions. The humans maintained diplomatic observers in this chamber. They heard every word. Counselor Quintar stood slowly, his ancient frame shaking with emotion. We didn't just exclude them from decision-making. We officially declared them to be less than sentient. We voted to treat them as livestock, and they left without a word of protest, Ethan observed. They could have fought. They could have destroyed everything they had built out of spite. Instead, they simply left us to face the consequences of our choices. The council chamber fell silent as the full weight of their actions settled over them. For 3 centuries, humans had served as the moral backbone of galactic civilization. They had volunteered for the dangerous jobs, protected the weak, and sacrificed themselves for others not because they were ordered to, but because they believed it was right. They were better than us, Forthon admitted quietly. In every way that matters, they were better than us, and we treated them like animals. Outside the council chambers, the galaxy continued its slow collapse. Species retreated into isolation, abandoning the cooperative ideals that had defined galactic civilization. Trade networks crumbled, research programs failed, and humanitarian efforts ceased. In the darkness between stars, automated beacons still broadcast messages that humans had left behind. Medical protocols for unknown diseases, engineering solutions for infrastructure problems, emergency procedures for disasters that hadn't happened yet. Even in their absence, they were still trying to help. Still trying to prepare others for challenges they might face. Still believing that knowledge and preparation could save lives, even if those lives belonged to species that had declared them expendable. The galaxy was learning too late that true civilization wasn't built on technology or politics or philosophical debates. It was built on the willingness to sacrifice for others, to face danger for the sake of strangers, and to believe that every life had value. These were lessons that humans had tried to teach for 300 years. Now, with their teachers gone, the students were failing every test that mattered. The largest search operation in galactic history began 1 year after humanity's disappearance. Every available ship, every long-range sensor, every deep space probe was dedicated to finding traces of the missing species. High Counselor Vorthon had authorized unlimited resources for the mission, though the Council's authority now extended over barely a third of its former territory. Admiral Kexthari commanded the search fleet from the bridge of the massive exploration vessel Galactic Unity. The ship had been built by humans decades earlier, and its crew was uncomfortably aware of how many systems they didn't fully understand. Human engineering was efficient to the point of seeming magical, with redundancies and failsafes that activated automatically in situations that other species had never anticipated. "Sir, we have something," reported sensor operator Yilnex, her voice tight with excitement. "Deep Space Monitoring Array has detected quantum resonance signatures at grid reference 4471. The bridge fell silent as the readings appeared on the main display. The energy patterns were unlike anything in the galactic database, showing massive fleet movements and formations that suggested coordination on an impossible scale. How many ships would create signatures this large? Admiral Kexthari asked. Chief Science Officer Vox Allen ran the calculations through their most advanced computers. Based on energy output alone, we're looking at a minimum of 10,000 vessels. Possibly much more. 10,000? The Admiral's voice cracked slightly. The entire human fleet never numbered more than 3,000 ships. Where did they get such a force? The answer began to emerge as the search fleet followed the quantum trails toward the galactic rim. Each new discovery challenged everything the Council thought they knew about human capabilities. The trail led through regions of space that should have been impossible to navigate, past stellar phenomena that would destroy any known ship design. They went through the Maelstrom Nebula, reported Navigation Officer Texhari, disbelief clear in his voice. The readings show multiple fleet passages through the most dangerous region in known space. Admiral Kexthari stared at the tactical display. The Maelstrom Nebula was a cosmic storm of dark matter and exotic particles that had destroyed every probe ever sent into it. Even approaching the outer edge was considered suicidal. "Run a simulation," he ordered. "What would it take for our ships to survive passage through the nebula?" The results were sobering. Even their most advanced vessels would need modifications that were beyond current technology. Force field generators would have to be increased by 300%. Hull materials would need to be replaced with compounds that existed only in theoretical physics papers. "Sir," Vox Allen said quietly, "the humans didn't just survive passage through the nebula. They did it regularly. These readings show at least 50 separate transit events over the past 5 years. The implications were staggering. Humans had been operating in regions of space that the rest of the galaxy considered impossible to reach. What had they been doing out there? What had they found beyond the barriers that confined everyone else? The search fleet pushed deeper into uncharted space, following quantum trails that grew stronger as they approached the galactic edge. Each discovery revealed more evidence of human technological capabilities that far exceeded official estimates. "We found something," came the urgent transmission from Scout Ship Endeavour. "You need to see this." The images that followed left the entire search fleet in stunned silence. Floating in the void near the galactic rim was a space station of impossible size and complexity. It was clearly human in design, but built on a scale that dwarfed anything in Council records. "The station is 1,500 kilometers long," reported Scout Captain Nixera. "Power readings suggest a civilization capable of dismantling entire star systems for resources." Admiral Kexthari ordered the fleet to maintain a respectful distance while scanning the abandoned facility. The station appeared to be some kind of construction shipyard, with massive docking bays designed for vessels far larger than anything in the galactic fleet. "There are construction records in the station's databases," reported computer specialist Lixtara. They show completion of over 500 ships, each one larger than our entire capital vessels. The records painted a picture of human industry that defied belief. While the Council had viewed them as a primitive species focused on manual labor, humans had been secretly developing technology that made the rest of the galaxy look like children playing with toys. "Look at these power generation systems," Chief Engineer Caxnell said, his voice filled with wonder. "They're not using fusion or antimatter. This is something completely new. Something that generates energy by manipulating space-time itself." The abandoned station held more secrets than the search fleet could catalog in months. Human research notes described technologies that Council scientists had deemed impossible. Faster-than-light communication systems that worked across galactic distances, manufacturing techniques that could create material stronger than neutronium, weapons that could disrupt the fundamental forces that held matter together. They were holding back, Admiral Kexathari realized. All those years they served alongside us, and they were holding back technologies that could have revolutionized everything. The most disturbing discovery came from the station's communication logs. Records showed contact with civilizations beyond the galactic rim, species that the Council had never even imagined existed. Humans hadn't just left local space, they had been invited to join something larger. "There are 17 different species mentioned in these diplomatic files," reported Communications Officer Yaltesh. All of them describe similar experiences. Advanced civilizations that use them for dangerous work, while denying them equal status. The pattern was becoming clear. Humans weren't unique in their experience of exploitation. Across multiple galaxies, advanced species had made the same mistake, treating valuable contributors as expendable resources instead of equal partners. They formed an alliance, Vox Allen said, reviewing the diplomatic records. The United Federation of Independent Species, all of them refugees from civilizations that failed to recognize their worth. The search fleet discovered construction records for massive colony ships, each one capable of transporting entire planetary populations across intergalactic distances. The designs incorporated technologies that seemed to ignore known laws of physics, creating artificial gravity wells and environmental systems that could sustain life indefinitely. They weren't just leaving, Admiral Kexthari realized. They were prepared to leave. This evacuation was planned for years, maybe decades. Investigation of the station's historical records revealed the truth that the Council had been dreading. 3 days before their departure, Human Intelligence Services had intercepted the Council's final vote to classify them as expendable biological resources. They knew, Communications Officer Yaltesh said, her voice barely a whisper. They heard every word we said about them. They knew exactly how we saw them. The transmission logs showed something even more heartbreaking. In the hours after learning of the Council's decision, human leadership had debated their response. Some had wanted to fight, to use their superior technology to demand better treatment. Others had wanted to expose the Council's hypocrisy to the galaxy. Instead, they had chosen exodus. They had decided that galactic civilization was not worth saving if it was built on exploitation and prejudice. Rather than waste time trying to reform a system that viewed them as animals, they had simply left to build something better elsewhere. They could have destroyed us, Admiral Kexathari said to his assembled staff. With technology like this, they could have conquered the entire galaxy. Instead, they chose to leave peacefully. The final discovery in the station's database was a message left specifically for any search teams that might follow. The holographic recording showed a human woman in a simple civilian outfit, her expression calm but deeply sad. To whoever finds this message, she began, we want you to know that we hold no hatred for the species we served alongside for 3 centuries. We learned much from you about art, philosophy, and the beauty of diverse civilizations working together. Her image paused, looking directly at the camera with eyes that seemed to see across time and space. We also learned that cooperation requires mutual respect, that partnership requires equality, that true civilization cannot be built on the backs of those you consider expendable. The message continued with technical specifications for technologies that could help stabilize the collapsing galaxy, medical treatments for the plagues ravaging outer worlds, engineering solutions for failing infrastructure. Even in their final message, humans were still trying to help. We leave these gifts not because we owe them to you, but because we believe that every life has value, even among those who did not extend the same courtesy to us. Perhaps in time, you will learn to build a civilization worthy of the name. The recording ended with coordinates to a location beyond the galactic rim, along with a simple message. When you learn to value contribution over politics, when you choose cooperation over exploitation, you will be welcome to join us. Admiral Kexathari stared at the empty holographic platform where the message had played. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished from the galaxy, and the Great Council chamber stood nearly empty. Where once 43 species had gathered to debate the future of galactic civilization, now only 7 representatives remained. The rest had either retreated into isolation or simply ceased to exist as their societies collapsed under the weight of problems they could no longer solve. Counselor Vextari sat alone in the vast chamber, surrounded by empty seats and the echoes of better times. As the sole remaining member trying to hold the council together, she had become both witness and chronicler of civilization's decline. The reports on her desk painted a picture of almost complete societal breakdown. The Galactic Medical Corps had officially disbanded after losing 90% of its personnel to diseases they couldn't treat. The Trade Federation existed only on paper, with commerce between star systems reduced to desperate bartering between isolated colonies. The once mighty galactic fleet had been reduced to a few hundred ships, most of which were grounded due to lack of spare parts and maintenance expertise that only humans had possessed. Status report from Sector 7 announced the chamber's automated system, one of the few technologies still functioning properly. The voice that followed belonged to Governor Yixtal, his exhaustion evident even through the communication link. "We've lost contact with 12 more colonies this week," he reported. "The Crimson Plague has spread beyond our ability to contain it. Without human medical teams, we're forced to implement complete planetary quarantines." Vextari closed her eyes, feeling the weight of each lost world. The plagues that humans had easily contained were now sweeping across the galaxy like wildfire. Each outbreak resulted in the abandonment of entire star systems, as terrified populations fled to regions that seemed safer but were actually just as vulnerable. "What about the emergency protocols?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The human protocols require medical supplies we can't manufacture and techniques our doctors can't perform. We've tried to adapt their procedures, but without their understanding of how diseases spread in hostile environments, we're just delaying the inevitable." The communication ended, leaving Vextari alone with her thoughts and the growing list of civilizations that would never recover from humanity's absence. The Andromedans had been the first to fall, their trade-based society collapsing when shipping lanes became too dangerous to navigate. The crystalline communes had shattered when their research facilities could no longer operate in hazardous environments. The Zephyrian Empire had devolved into civil war when their military discovered they couldn't maintain order without human peacekeeping expertise. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Vexitari activated the display, hoping for good news but expecting another report of disaster. Instead, she found herself looking at something that made her heart stop. The signal was coming from beyond the galactic rim. The transmission bore the unmistakable marks of human communication protocols, but with technological sophistication that far exceeded anything in the galactic database. "Greetings to the Galactic Council," came a calm, familiar voice. The speaker was a human woman, but she wore clothing that seemed to be made from materials that shifted and flowed like liquid starlight. Behind her, Vextari could see glimpses of a space station that dwarfed anything in Council records. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the United Federation of Independent Species. We have been monitoring the situation in our former galaxy and feel compelled to address the ongoing crisis." Vextari's hands shook as she activated the recording system. This was the first direct contact with humanity since their departure, and she knew that every word would be analyzed by the few remaining galactic governments. "We want to be clear that we hold no malice toward the species we once served alongside," Admiral Chen continued. "Our departure was not motivated by revenge, but by the simple recognition that we could not build a better future within a system that viewed us as expendable." The transmission paused, and Vexitari could see other figures moving in the background. They appeared to be representatives of various species, none of which she recognized. The human woman was speaking for an alliance that extended far beyond anything the Galactic Council had ever imagined. In the 2 years since our departure, we have established colonies in 17 different galaxies. We have formed partnerships with civilizations that understand the value of cooperation over exploitation. We have built a society where contribution is valued regardless of species, where dangerous work is shared equally among volunteers, and where every voice has equal weight in decision-making. Vextari felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to the description of everything the Galactic Council could have been but had chosen not to become. We have also continued to monitor the situation in our birth galaxy, and we are saddened by the suffering that has resulted from the breakdown of cooperative systems. Plagues rage unchecked, infrastructure crumbles, and countless innocent beings suffer from decisions they had no part in making. The transmission included detailed technical specifications for technologies that could address many of the galaxy's current crises. Medical treatments for the engineered plagues, engineering solutions for failing life support systems, communication protocols that could help isolated colonies coordinate relief efforts. We offer these gifts not because we owe them to you, but because we believe that suffering should be alleviated wherever possible, regardless of past grievances. Admiral Chen's expression softened, showing something that looked almost like pity. However, we also want to be clear about the conditions under which formal contact could be re-established. The United Federation of Independent Species stands ready to welcome any civilization that demonstrates a genuine commitment to equality, cooperation, and the inherent value of all sentient life. The coordinates that followed pointed to a location just beyond the galactic rim, where long-range sensors had detected massive construction projects and energy signatures that suggested a thriving interstellar civilization. When your society learns to value contribution over politics, when you choose cooperation over exploitation, when you build systems that protect the vulnerable rather than using them, you will find us at these coordinates. Until then, we wish you wisdom in your choices and strength in your struggles. The transmission ended, leaving Vextari alone in the empty council chamber, with the weight of humanity's final judgment hanging in the air. They had not abandoned the galaxy out of spite or hatred. They had left because they refused to be part of a civilization built on exploitation, and they had built something better elsewhere. Standing slowly, Vextari walked to the great windows that looked out over the Council World's capital city. Once it had been a shining example of interspecies cooperation, with beings from dozens of worlds working together in harmony. Now large sections of the city stood empty and dark. Their inhabitants fled to safer regions or simply dead from problems that humans could have solved easily. She thought about the monuments that humans had built throughout the galaxy, inscribed with words like "in service to all species" and "no one left behind." Those monuments still stood, but they now served as painful reminders of ideals that the galaxy had possessed but never truly understood. The irony was bitter and complete. Humans had spent 3 centuries trying to teach the galaxy about cooperation, sacrifice, and the value of every life. They had demonstrated these principles through their actions, volunteering for the most dangerous jobs, protecting the weakest members of society, and always putting the needs of others before their own. And the galaxy had responded by voting to classify them as expendable biological resources. Now, with humans gone and their lessons forgotten, galactic civilization was collapsing under the weight of its own selfishness. Species retreated into isolation rather than risk helping others. Dangerous jobs went undone because no one else was willing to take the risks. Research stagnated because no one else was willing to make the sacrifices necessary for dangerous discoveries. Vextari made her way to the Council's memorial garden, where statues honored the greatest contributors to galactic civilization. For centuries, these monuments had featured philosophers, artists, and political leaders, but scattered among them were smaller statues that most people overlooked, memorials to human volunteers who had died in service to others. The largest of these was dedicated to Captain James Rodriguez, who had piloted his ship into a dying star to gather data that saved billions of lives. The inscription read simply, "He chose to go so others could live." Similar memorials could be found throughout the garden. Dr. Maria Santos, who had exposed herself to deadly radiation to develop treatments for rare diseases. Engineer Michael O'Brien, who had descended into a black hole's accretion disk to repair a failing research station. Commander Lisa Park, who had held the line against overwhelming odds so that civilian evacuations could be completed. Each memorial told the same story. Humans who had voluntarily faced death to help others, often protecting species that viewed them as inferior. They had done these things not because they were ordered to, but because they believed it was right.